Clara Thorne stood trembling at the saloon's back door, the doctor's note for her dying son's medicine burning in her pocket like a death sentence as she prepared to sell the only thing she had left, her dignity. When the town's reclusive blacksmith slipped her a folded message offering medicine and honest work instead, she never imagined his protection would cost him everything, or that their desperate arrangement would ignite feelings neither dared acknowledge. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Embertown was dying. What had once been a bustling mining settlement now clung to existence by fraying threads, its last remaining souls too stubborn or too poor to leave. Among them was Clara Thorne, a widow of 24 with twin children to feed and a heart hardened by loss. The autumn wind cut through Clara's thin shawl as she stood before Embertown's only thriving establishment, the Gilded Spur Saloon. Its windows glowed amber against the dusk, raucous laughter spilling into the dirt street. She hesitated, fingers pressed against the worn letter in her pocket. The physician's elegant script had been clear. Without proper medicine, her son Jacob wouldn't survive the winter. His lungs, weak since birth, needed treatment beyond what Dr. Harlow could provide with his limited supplies. Her daughter Emma's small hand tugged at her skirt. "Mama, I'm cold. Can we go home now?" Clara knelt, tucking a strand of copper hair behind Emma's ear. "Soon, darling. Mama needs to speak with Mr. Blackwood about work." "But you already work at the boarding house," Emma said, her brow furrowing. Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. Sometimes one job isn't enough. After walking the children back to their tiny rented room above the general store, Clara tucked them into bed with promises of a better tomorrow. She waited until their breathing slowed, then slipped out, pausing only to stare at her reflection in the cracked mirror by the door. Her face, once soft with youth, now bore the weathered determination of a woman who had buried her husband 2 years prior and her dreams alongside him. The saloon owner, Silas Blackwood, received her in his office, his eyes appraising her like livestock at auction. "Desperate times, Mrs. Thorne." His smile never reached his eyes. "I wondered how long it would take. I need $20 for medicine and more for food and rent." Clara's voice remained steady despite the shame burning in her chest. Blackwood leaned back in his chair. "You're still a handsome woman. Could be good for business." He sipped his whiskey. "Dancing, serving drinks, smiling at the customers. Nothing more unless you choose it." He paused. "Though choosing has a different meaning when your children are hungry, doesn't it?" Clara's jaw tightened. "When would I start? Tonight?" He reached into a drawer and pulled out a dress of emerald silk. "This should fit. The girls will show you what to do." Later, standing in the cramped back room of the saloon, Clara stared at herself in another mirror, barely recognizing the woman reflected back. The dress clung to curves, long hidden beneath practical cotton, the neckline lower than anything she'd worn since her wedding night. One of the other girls, Rosie, she'd said her name was, fastened the last button and stepped back. "First night's the hardest, honey," Rosie said, her painted lips curved in sympathy. "Just smile and laugh at their jokes, even the bad ones. Especially the bad one." Clara nodded, unable to speak. Her hands trembled slightly as she followed Rosie out onto the floor, the noise and smoke assaulting her senses. "Looks like Blackwood found a new flower," a miner called out, raising his glass. Clara forced a smile that felt like shattered glass on her lips and moved through the room, carrying trays of drinks, trying to become invisible even as every eye seemed to follow her. The hours blurred together in a haze of leering faces and wandering hands she deftly avoided. Just before midnight, the saloon doors swung open, and a hush fell briefly over the room. Clara turned to see the newcomer, a tall man with broad shoulders and a face half hidden by a dark beard. Unlike the miners and cowboys, he wore no gun belt, just a leather apron over simple clothes. Coal dust clung to his forearms despite evident efforts to wash. "Well, look who decided to join us," Blackwood called from behind the bar. "The man who puts the ember in Embertown." A few patrons chuckled, but the blacksmith, for that's clearly what he was, ignored them, making his way to an empty table in the corner. Clara watched him curiously. He was a fixture in town, yet something of a mystery. Samuel Vaughan, the blacksmith who spoke little but whose work was renowned throughout the territory. His strong hands, capable of bending iron to his will, now wrapped around a solitary glass of whiskey. "Don't waste your time with that one," Rosie whispered as she passed by. "Comes in once a month, drinks alone, leaves alone. Lost his wife in childbirth years ago. Some say he hasn't spoken more than 10 words at a time since." Clara nodded, but found her attention drawn back to him throughout the evening. Unlike the other men, he didn't call for service or stare at the girls. He simply drank in silence, his eyes occasionally scanning the room as if taking inventory of its occupants. When Blackwood directed her to bring the blacksmith another drink, Clara approached his table with caution. "Another whiskey, Mr. Vaughan." His eyes lifted to hers, deep blue like mountain lakes, startling in their clarity, and for a moment Clara felt oddly exposed, as if he could see through the silken paint to the desperate mother beneath. He gave a slight nod, and she placed the glass before him. As she turned to leave, his voice, low and rough from disuse, stopped her. "You're Jonathan Thorne's widow." Clara paused. "Yes, he was a good man." "Honest." "He was," she agreed, surprised. "Did you know him well?" "He commissioned a locket from me once. Said it was for his wife's birthday." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Had me engrave a thistle on it. Said you were as beautiful and fierce as a highland flower." Clara's hand drifted to her throat, where the silver locket still hung, hidden beneath the gaudy dress. "That was you," she whispered. "I've treasured it since." Samuel nodded once, then returned his attention to his drink. The brief moment of connection severed. Clara retreated, her cheeks warm with an emotion she couldn't name. For the rest of the night, she felt his occasional glance, though whenever she looked his way, his eyes were elsewhere. At 2 a.m, when the last drunken patron had been shown the door, Blackwood pressed coins into her palm, more money than she'd earned in a week at the boarding house. "You did well enough," he said. "Tomorrow, wear your hair down." The night air felt cleansing after the stifling heat of the saloon. Clara hurried through the deserted streets, clutching her shawl around her shoulders, the taste of shame bitter on her tongue. At the general store, she climbed the back stairs quietly, praying the children still slept. She found them as she'd left them, Emma's arm protectively draped over her brother even in sleep. Jacob's breathing was labored, each inhale a struggle against the growing weakness in his chest. Clara sank to her knees beside the bed, tears finally breaking free. In the faint moonlight streaming through the window, she opened her palm to count her night's wages. Among the coins lay a folded piece of paper she didn't recognize. Unfolding it carefully, she found a message in a strong, precise hand. "The medicine your boy needs. I can get it. No cost to you. Meet me at the forge tomorrow at noon. S.V." Clara clutched the note to her chest, a dangerous flutter of hope waking within her. In the forge of her hardship, perhaps Providence had finally sparked. Dawn broke with reluctant grey light over Embertown as Clara woke, her back stiff from sleeping on the floor beside the children's bed. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind until memories of the previous night crashed over her. The saloon, the men's eyes, the blacksmith's note. She sat up abruptly, checking that the folded paper was still tucked safely in her bodice. The children slept on, Emma's face peaceful while Jacob's was flushed with fever. Clara placed a gentle hand on his forehead and frowned at the heat radiating from his skin. "Just hold on a little longer, my brave boy," she whispered, brushing damp hair from his forehead. She rose quietly and changed into her simple day dress, scrubbing away the remnants of rouge from her cheeks until her skin felt raw. The woman in the mirror looked more like herself again, tired, worried, but undefeated. Clara tucked the coins she'd earned into a small tin beneath a loose floorboard, holding back only enough for bread and a bit of honey to tempt Jacob's failing appetite. By mid-morning, she had settled the children with Mrs. Peterson, the elderly widow who lived downstairs and occasionally watched them when Clara worked at the boarding house. "He's worse," Mrs. Peterson observed, her rheumy eyes fixed on Jacob as he dozed in a chair by her fire. "That cough sounds deep. The doctor says he needs special medicine," Clara replied, adjusting the blanket around her son's shoulders. "I'm working on getting it." Mrs. Peterson's gaze sharpened. "Heard you were at Blackwood's place last night?" The words struck like a physical blow. News traveled quickly in Embertown, quicker than Clara had anticipated. She straightened her spine. "I'm doing what I must for my children." The older woman's expression softened. "No judgment here, child. Lord knows I've seen enough of life to understand its cruel bargains." She patted Clara's hand. "Just be careful. That place has broken stronger women than you." With a promise to return before supper, Clara kissed both children goodbye and stepped into the crisp autumn air. The walk to the blacksmith's forge took her past the center of town, where women shopping at the general store fell silent as she passed, their whispers resuming in her wake. Clara kept her eyes forward, though each murmur stung like nettle. The forge stood at the edge of town, smoke rising steadily from its stone chimney. The rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil grew louder as she approached, its steady beat like the town's own heartbeat. Clara hesitated at the wide doorway, suddenly uncertain. Inside, Samuel Vaughan worked with his back to her, muscles shifting beneath his shirt as he shaped red-hot metal with powerful strokes. Sparks flew with each impact, tiny stars dying in the dim interior of the forge. The heat enveloped Clara as she stepped inside, carrying the sense of coal, iron, and honest sweat. "Mr. Vaughan." The hammering stopped. Samuel turned, wiping his forearm across his brow, leaving a smudge of soot. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by something Clara couldn't decipher. "Mrs. Thorne." He set the hammer down and moved toward a workbench. "You came. Your note mentioned medicine for my son." Clara remained near the doorway, maintaining a careful distance. "I don't understand what you're offering or why." Samuel's hands, massive and calloused, retrieved a small wooden box from beneath a stack of sketches. "My brother's a doctor in Denver," he explained, voice low as if unaccustomed to stringing so many words together. "Sends me supplies sometimes. Thought of your boy when this came." He held out the box. Clara approached cautiously and opened it. Inside lay 3 small amber bottles with neatly printed labels. "This is creosol compound," she breathed, recognizing the medicine Dr. Harlow had recommended. "How did you know?" "Heard you talking to the doctor outside his office last week." A faint flush colored his cheeks. Wasn't eavesdropping, just happened to be passing. Clara closed the box, conflicting emotions warring within her. "This is very kind, but I can't accept such charity, Mr. Vaughan." "Not charity." He turned back to his anvil, picking up a horseshoe cooling in the slack tub. "Consider it payment." "Payment for what?" "Need help around the forge." He gestured to the cluttered space. "Books need keeping. Correspondence needs writing. My hand's better with iron than ink." Clara glanced around the workshop. Order existed within the apparent chaos. Tools hung in precise arrangements, materials sorted by type, but ledgers on a small desk lay open and neglected, pages dog-eared and stained. "You're offering me work?" she asked, suspicion edging her voice. In her experience, men rarely offered something for nothing, especially to a widow. Samuel met her eyes directly. 3 hours a day, afternoon. Bring the children if needed. There's a room in backstays warm from the forge. He paused. Pays fair. Medicine is advance on wages. The blunt offer, delivered without pretense, caught Clara off guard. She studied his face for hidden motives, but found only steadfast sincerity in his weathered features. Still, caution prevailed. "Why would you help us? You hardly know me." Samuel turned away, returning to his work. For a long moment, only the sound of bellows feeding the forge fire filled the space between them. When he finally spoke, his voice carried such quiet conviction that Clara had to strain to hear. "Your husband once told me his greatest fear was leaving you and the little ones alone in this world." The hammer rose and fell, punctuating his words. "Said if anything happened to him, he hoped good people would look out for you. Strike." I gave him my word. Strike. That's all. A promise to a dead man. Such a simple explanation, yet Clara sensed deeper currents beneath. She glanced again at the medicine box in her hands, thinking of Jacob's labored breathing, of the fever that wouldn't break. "I accept your offer, Mr. Vaughan. When shall I start?" "Tomorrow noon." He didn't look up from his work. "Bring the boy. Forge air's good for weak lungs." Old Smith's remedy, relief and gratitude threatened to overwhelm her composure. Clara nodded, though he couldn't see it. "Thank you." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her once more. "Mrs. Thorne." "Yes?" "The saloon." His hammer paused mid-stroke. "No need for that anymore." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "Mr. Vaughan." My arrangements are not—" "Didn't mean it that way." He looked up, those startling blue eyes meeting hers. "You just meant you'll earn enough here. For medicine, for food." A pause. "For dignity." The words hung between them, an offering more valuable than the medicine itself. Clara felt something crack within her chest, a hairline fracture in the wall she'd built around her heart since Jonathan's death. "Until tomorrow, then," she said softly, and stepped back into the autumn sunlight. Walking home, the wooden box clutched to her chest like a talisman. Clara felt lighter than she had in months. That evening, as she administered the first dose of medicine to Jacob, watching as his breathing eased almost immediately, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps fortune had finally turned in their favor. Later, after the children had fallen asleep, Clara sat by candlelight at their small table and carefully penned a note. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote, "Mr. Blackwood, I regret to inform you that I will not be returning to work at the Gilded Spur. I appreciate the opportunity, brief though it was. Respectfully, Clara Thorne." She sealed it with a drop of candle wax, knowing the consequences of her decision might still come to call. Blackwood was not a man who accepted disappointment graciously, but for tonight, at least, she would sleep without shame, waiting her dream. The first week of Clara's new arrangement passed in a rhythm as steady as Samuel's hammer on the anvil. Each day at noon, she would arrive at the forge with the children in tow, Jacob wrapped in blankets, despite the unseasonable warmth of the Indian summer day. Emma, naturally curious, would immediately explore the workshop, asking endless questions about tools and metals, while Clara settled at the small desk to bring order to the blacksmith's neglected accounts. The work itself was straightforward. Samuel's business was robust, despite Embertown's decline. Ranchers from miles around still needed horseshoes and farm implements. Passing stagecoaches required wheel repairs, and the remaining townsfolk had constant need of his skill. What surprised Clara was the artistry hidden among the utilitarian ledger entries. Samuel crafted delicate silver jewelry, ornate iron gates, and copper weather vanes of remarkable beauty. His prices for such work, she noted, were far below what similar items would fetch in Denver or Santa Fe. "You should charge more for these special commissions," she told him on the 5th day, holding up a sketch of an elaborate door knocker designed as a snarling mountain lion. Samuel shrugged, not looking up from the red-hot metal he was shaping. "Don't do it for the money." By the end of the week, Clara had organized his accounts, written responses to pending orders, and created a proper inventory of his materials. The desk gleamed, cleared of dust and clutter, while nearby shelves now held neatly labeled folders. In the back room, she'd established a comfortable area for the children with a small cot where Jacob could rest and a box of wooden toys Samuel had produced from some hidden corner of the forge. The most remarkable change, however, was in Jacob himself. Whether from the medicine, the warm, dry air of the forge, or the fascination of watching Samuel work, the boy's condition improved visibly with each passing day. His cough grew less frequent, the fever abated, and a healthy flush replaced the sickly pallor of his cheeks. "Look, Mama!" he called one afternoon, standing beside Samuel at the workbench. "I'm making a horse." Clara looked up from her ledgers to see her son carefully filing a small piece of metal under Samuel's watchful guidance. The blacksmith's massive hands hovered nearby, ready to assist, but allowing the boy his independence. The contrast between them, her fragile son and this mountain of a man, brought an unexpected tightness to her throat. "Very fine work," she managed, catching Samuel's eye over Jacob's head. The blacksmith gave her a slight nod, the barest hint of a smile touching his lips before he returned his attention to the boy. These silent exchanges had become a language of their own. Acknowledgements, questions, and reassurances conveyed without words. Clara found herself growing attuned to Samuel's expressions, learning to read the shift of his shoulders and the furrow of his brow. For a man of so few words, he communicated with remarkable clarity through gesture and presence. Emma, too, had formed an unlikely bond with the taciturn blacksmith. She would perch on a stool near his workbench, chattering about everything and nothing, seemingly unbothered by his limited responses. To Clara's surprise, Samuel listened attentively, occasionally asking a question that would send Emma into elaborate explanations of her 6-year-old logic. It was during one such conversation that Silas Blackwood made his appearance at the forge. Clara saw him first. The saloon owner's distinctive bowler hat and red waistcoat unmistakable in the doorway. She froze, ledger forgotten in her hands, as he stepped inside, eyes adjusting to the dimmer light. "Do well! Isn't this cozy?" Blackwood drawled, glancing around the workshop. His gaze landed on Clara, narrowed briefly, then shifted to the children and Samuel. Quite the little family scene. Samuel straightened from his anvil, hammer still in hand. "Something you need, Blackwood? Just checking in on a former employee." The saloon owner smiled thinly at Clara. "Mrs. Thorne left my establishment rather abruptly. Poor form, leaving nothing but a note." Clara rose from the desk, positioning herself between Blackwood and the children. "I explain my reasons in that note. Mr. Blackwood." "You explain nothing," he countered, adjusting his gold watch chain with manicured fingers. "You worked one night and disappeared, after I went to the trouble of providing you with suitable attire, no less." His eyes traveled down her simple dress with pointed disapproval. "Under the dress is in your office, cleaned and pressed," Clara replied, keeping her voice level despite the rapid beating of her heart. "And I thank you for the opportunity, brief though it was." Blackwood's smile never reached his eyes. "Opportunity, yes. One that many women in your precarious situation would be grateful for. The patrons asked after you, you know, found you quite charming." Samuel set down his hammer with deliberate care. The sound of it against the anvil echoed in the sudden silence. "State your business or leave." Blackwood. The saloon owner's attention shifted to the blacksmith, his expression hardening. "My business is with Mrs. Thorne, not you, Vaughan, unless you've staked some claim I'm unaware of." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Vaughan has kindly employed me to manage his accounts, Mr. Blackwood. That's all." "Is it?" Blackwood looked between them with exaggerated skepticism. "The whole town's talking, you know. The widow Thorne and the reclusive blacksmith. Such an unconventional arrangement." "Mama?" Emma's small voice cut through the tension. "Why is that man angry?" Clara's protective instinct flared. "He's not angry, darling. Mr. Blackwood was just leaving." "Indeed." Blackwood tipped his hat with mock courtesy. But before I go, a friendly warning. Embertown has a long memory, Mrs. Thorne. Once a saloon girl, always a saloon girl in their eyes. One night was enough." His gaze flicked to the children, something to consider when thinking of their future. The threat, veiled though it was, hung in the air like forge smoke. Before Clara could respond, Samuel moved to stand beside her, his presence solid as an oak. "That all?" he asked, voice deceptively calm. Blackwood's smile faltered slightly at the blacksmith's unwavering stare. For now, he turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Vaughan, I'll be needing those decorative railings for the saloon's new balcony by month's end, as we agreed." After he departed, Clara sank back onto her chair, hands trembling. "And I'm sorry to have brought this trouble to your door." Samuel returned to his work, the rhythm of his hammer more forceful than before. "No trouble. He's not a man to craw," Clara persisted. "And he's right. The town is talking. This arrangement," she gestured vaguely at the forge, "the desk, the children, it might damage your standing." The hammering stopped. Samuel turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable. "Don't care what people say." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Never have." Clara studied him, this man of iron and few words. "Why did you really help us, Mr. Vaughan? And don't tell me it was just a promise to Jonathan." Samuel's gaze dropped to his soot-stained hand. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackling of the forge fire. When he looked up again, Clara saw something raw and unguarded in his eyes. "My wife," he began, the words emerging with visible effort. "Sarah, she died bringing our daughter into the world. The baby too." His jaw worked. "No one helped. Doctor was drunk. Town ladies wouldn't come. Said Sarah was unsuitable. She'd been a dancer before we married." Understanding dawned on Clara. "Like me at the saloon." Samuel nodded once. "Watched you struggling, alone. Saw the same judgment." His hands clenched. "Couldn't stand by. Not again." The simple explanation delivered with such painful honesty, struck Clara to her core. This man understood what it meant to be marked by circumstance, to carry labels assigned by others. In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition, a kinship forged in shared experience. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. He nodded, already turning back to his work. But Clara had seen enough to know that Samuel Vaughan had just shared more of himself than he had with anyone in years. That evening, as Clara walked home with the children, Jacob's steps stronger than they had been in months. She pondered Blackwood's warning and Samuel's revelation. The town's judgment hung over her like a shadow, yet for the first time since Jonathan's death, she felt something like hope taking root, not just for survival, but for understanding, for connection. "Mama," Emma said suddenly, skipping alongside her, "Mr. Samuel doesn't smile much with his mouth, but he smiles with his eyes when he looks at you." Clara blinked in surprise. "Does he now?" Emma nodded with the absolute certainty of childhood. "Nah, and you smile more at the forge than you do anywhere else." Out of the mouths of babes, Clara thought, tightening her grip on her daughter's hand as they made their way home through the gathering dusk. October surrendered to November with a sudden fury of wind and sleet that transformed Embertown overnight. Clara woke to frost patterns on the window glass and the children's excited chatter about the season's first snow. As she prepared a meager breakfast of porridge sweetened with the last of their honey, a knock came at the door. Standing on the threshold was Samuel, his broad shoulders dusted with snowflakes, breath clouding in the morning air. In his arms, he carried a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "Mr. Vaughan," Clara said, surprised. "Is something wrong at the forge?" He shook his head. "Brought these." Stepping inside at her gesture, he placed the bundle on the table and carefully unwrapped it. Inside were 2 small coats made of thick wool, lined with flannel, and a pair of sturdy boots that would clearly fit Jacob. Clara stared at the items, then at Samuel. "We can't accept already made," he interrupted. "No use sending back." His eyes moved to the children, who were eyeing the coats with undisguised longing. "Growing boy needs proper boots, lungs still healing." Before Clara could protest further, Emma rushed forward and threw her arms around Samuel's waist. "Thank you, Mr. Samuel. Is mine the blue one? Blue is my favorite." The blacksmith stood rigid for a moment, clearly startled by the child's embrace. Then, with infinite gentleness, he placed one large hand on Emma's head. "Blue for you, brown for Jacob." Clara watched the scene with a complicated tightness in her chest. "The children and I will pay you back somehow," she said softly. "Perhaps extra hours at the forge." Samuel shook his head again. "No debt." He hesitated, then added, "Road to the forge gets treacherous in snow. Thought maybe," he cleared his throat, "might be safer if I came here to fetch you." At noon, the offer hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning beyond mere transportation. Clara was acutely aware of Mrs. Peterson moving about downstairs, of the neighbors who might see, of the gossip that would surely follow if the blacksmith began escorting her and the children daily. Yet something in his steady gaze, the sincerity there, the absence of ulterior motive, decided her. "That would be very kind, thank you." A slight relaxation around his eyes was his only reaction. But Clara was learning to read these subtle shifts. "Noon, then," he confirmed, and with a nod to the children, he departed. As predicted, their arrival at the forge that afternoon, Samuel leading the way, Clara and the children following in his broad wake, drew stares from the few townsfolk braving the cold. Clara kept her head high, refusing to acknowledge the whispers, though her cheeks burned with awareness. Inside the forge, warmth enveloped them immediately. Samuel had built up the fire beyond its usual strength, and Clara noticed new additions to the back room. A thick rug on the stone floor, additional blankets on the children's cot, and a small iron stove that hadn't been there before. "You've been busy," she observed, "helping the children out of their new coats." Samuel merely shrugged, already moving toward his anvil. Winter's here. The day proceeded much like any other, with Clara organizing correspondence while the children played quietly in the back room. Yet there was a difference in the air, a comfort in their shared routine that felt increasingly like something Clara dared not name. As the short winter day waned toward darkness, Samuel set aside his tools earlier than usual. "Should head back before nightfall," he said, Roads will freeze. Clara nodded, gathering her things. Jacob's doing much better with the medicine, she told him as she helped the children bundle up. Dr. Harlow says his lungs are stronger, though we'll need to be careful this winter. Samuel seemed to consider something. His brow furrowed. Might be best if he stopped, then began again. Forge stays warm all night. Got rooms upstairs, never used. His eyes met hers briefly before sliding away. Could stay, all of you, till spring. The offer struck Clara speechless. Living under the same roof as Samuel would cross a line from which there would be no return in the eyes of the town. Yet the practicality was undeniable. The warmth of the forge, the safety it offered, the savings in rent and fuel. People would talk, she said finally. Already do. A hint of wry humor touched his lips. It wouldn't be proper. Separate rooms, lock on your door. He gestured upstairs. Built it as a family home once. Before, the unspoken name, Sarah, hung between them. Clara understood then that he was offering not just shelter, but the fulfillment of an old dream, a house meant for a family that never came to be. Let me think on it, she said gently. He nodded, accepting her hesitation without argument. The journey back to their rooms was slow, going through the deepening snow. Samuel walked slightly ahead, occasionally turning to ensure they followed safely. Emma chatted the entire way, her words forming small clouds in the frigid air, while Jacob trudged silently beside Clara, his new boots leaving determined prints in the snow. As they approached the general store, Clara spotted a familiar figure on the boardwalk. Reverend Matthews, Embertown's aging minister, stood watching their approach with an expression that made Clara's stomach knot with apprehension. Mrs. Thorne, he greeted as they drew near. Mr. Vaughan. His tone was polite but cool, his eyes moving deliberately from Clara to Samuel and back again. Quite the weather we're having. Indeed, Reverend, Clara replied, attempting normalcy despite the judgment she felt radiating from him. How fortunate that Mr. Vaughan was able to escort us safely. The minister's gaze shifted to the children. Emma, Jacob, I've missed seeing you at Sunday school these past weeks. Clara felt a flush of guilt. They hadn't attended church since her night at the saloon, her shame too raw to face the congregation. The children have been unwell, she offered. Not quite a lie, given Jacob's condition. I see. Reverend Matthews' expression softened slightly as he looked at the boy. Well, we pray for their continued recovery and for guidance for all of Embertown's flock. This last, he directed pointedly at Clara. Samuel, who had remained silent during the exchange, suddenly spoke. Children need warm food. Getting late, Reverend. The minister's eyebrows rose at the blacksmith's intervention. Of course. Don't let me keep you. He touched the brim of his hat. Good evening to you all, Mrs. Thorne. Perhaps we might speak privately sometime soon. I believe there are matters concerning your soul that require attention. Clara managed a tight smile. Thank you for your concern, Reverend. Inside their rooms, after Samuel had departed with a promise to return at noon the next day, Clara moved about mechanically, preparing a simple supper while the children removed their wet things. The minister's words echoed in her mind, fueling the doubt that already plagued her regarding Samuel's offer. Mama, Jacob said suddenly from his place by the fire, why did the Reverend look at you and Mr. Samuel like that? Clara paused in slicing bread. Like what, sweetheart? Like you'd done something wrong? Jacob's perceptive gaze held hers. Is it because Mr. Samuel visits us now? Children saw everything, Clara thought with a pang. Some people in town think it's not proper for Mr. Vaughan to help us so much, she explained carefully. Because I'm a widow and he's... She searched for the right word. Alone, Emma supplied from where she sat, arranging her wooden animals. Yes, Clara said softly. Alone. But that's silly, Emma declared with the absolute conviction of childhood. Mr. Samuel helps us because he's kind, and because Daddy asked him to, and because his eyes smile at you, Jacob added matter-of-factly. Clara nearly dropped the knife. What did you say? Jacob looked up, surprised at her reaction. His eyes smile when he looks at you like Daddy's used to. He returned to warming his hands by the fire, unaware of the impact of his word. That night, long after the children had fallen asleep, Clara sat by the dying embers of their small fire, Samuel's offer turning over and over in her mind. The practical benefits were clear: safety, warmth, proximity to Jacob's medicine. Yet it was the other implications that kept her awake. The town's judgment, the Reverend's disapproval, and most confounding of all, the growing warmth she felt in Samuel's presence. "What would you have me do, Jonathan?" she whispered to the darkness, her fingers finding the silver locket at her throat. The thistle engraved there, Samuel's work, she now knew, seemed to pulse beneath her touch, a tangible connection to both men. No answer came, of course, only the soft sound of the children breathing and the occasional crackle of the fading coals. Outside, snow continued to fall on Embertown, covering its judgments and mercies alike in a blanket of pristine white. The Sunday following Reverend Matthew's encounter found Clara sitting rigidly in the last pew of Embertown's small church, children on either side of her. She had risen before dawn to press their best clothes, though the fabric was worn thin in places, and to braid Emma's hair with extra care. Jacob still coughed occasionally, but sat straighter than he had in months, the medicine and forge-warmed air gradually rebuilding his strength. Clara felt the congregation's eyes upon them throughout the service, sideways glances, whispered comments behind gloved hands. She kept her gaze fixed forward, chin lifted in quiet defiance, though her hands trembled slightly in her lap. Reverend Matthew's sermon seemed crafted specifically for her benefit, his text chosen from Proverbs. "The path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter till the full light of day. But the way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know what makes them stumble." Clara felt each word like a stone. She had made difficult choices for her children's survival. Was that wickedness? The single night at the saloon hung over her like a shadow, despite her hasty departure, and now her growing closeness to Samuel added fuel to the town's judgment, though their relationship remained entirely proper. After the final hymn, as the congregation filed out, Clara steeled herself for the inevitable. She nodded politely to those who would meet her eye, pretending not to notice those who pointedly looked away. Mrs. Harlow, the doctor's wife, stopped briefly to inquire after Jacob's health, but moved on quickly when her husband approached. Clara couldn't blame them. Their livelihood depended on the goodwill of the town. Mrs. Thorne, Reverend Matthews, intercepted her on the church steps. "Might I have a word in private?" Clara glanced at the children. "Emma, take your brother and wait by that big pine tree. I'll be just a moment." The minister led her to his small office attached to the church, closing the door with a finality that made Clara's heart quicken. He gestured to a chair, then sat behind his desk, folding his hands atop a worn Bible. "I'm pleased to see you and the children at worship today," he began. "The Lord welcomes all who seek his forgiveness." Clara kept her expression neutral. "We've always been faithful attendees, Reverend. Recent circumstances made it difficult. That's all. Recent circumstances." He repeated her words slowly. "That would include your brief employment at the Gilded Spur." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I did what I thought necessary for my children. Of course." His tone was sympathetic, but his eyes remained hard. The Lord understands our desperate moments, Mrs. Thorne, but true repentance requires a complete turning away from sin." He leaned forward. "Your current arrangement with Mr. Vaughan has caused considerable concern among the congregation." "There is nothing improper in my working for Mr. Vaughan," Clara stated firmly. He has been a Christian gentleman and a godsend to my family. I'm sure his intentions seem honorable to you," the Reverend sighed. "But appearances matter, Mrs. Thorne. A widow and her children living in such close association with a bachelor, it raises questions about moral character." "We don't live with him," Clara corrected, though Samuel's offer still weighed on her mind. "I merely keep his accounts while the children stay warm in his forge. For now." The minister's gaze was penetrating. "But tongues are wagging, Mrs. Thorne. There is talk of removing Emma and Jacob from the school come January, and Mrs. Peterson has mentioned finding your rooms potentially unsuitable for children." The implied threat sent ice through Clara's vein. "Now, are you saying the town would separate me from my children? The town wishes only what's best for those innocent souls." His voice softened to what he clearly thought was kindness. "There is a solution, Of course, which is distance yourself from Mr. Vaughan. Find more appropriate employment. Perhaps Mrs. Harlow needs household help. Demonstrate proper penitence for your lapse in judgment at the saloon. He reached across the desk, patting her hand in a gesture that made her skin crawl. The community would rally around a truly repentant widow. Clara withdrew her hand, rising slowly. Thank you for your concern, Reverend. I'll pray on it. Outside, she collected the children with hands that shook with anger and fear. The Reverend's warning had been clear: conform to the town's expectations or risk losing her children. Yet the suggested solution would mean surrendering the only security they'd found since Jonathan's death. Mama, are you crying? Emma asked as they walked home. Clara quickly wiped her cheek. Just the cold wind, darling. That afternoon, a knock at their door revealed Samuel, standing awkwardly with his hat in his hands. I didn't see you at the forge, he said by way of explanation. Wondered if the boy was worse. Clara glanced past him to ensure no neighbors watched from windows before inviting him inside. We attended church this morning, she explained, taking his coat. I thought perhaps it was time. Samuel nodded, understanding immediately. How was it? About as expected. Clara busied herself making tea, grateful the children were napping. Reverend Matthews had some concerns about our arrangement. Samuel's jaw tightened. What kind of concerns? Clara hesitated, then decided on honesty. He implied that if I continue working for you, there might be consequences for the children. A darkness passed over Samuel's features. Meaning, the school might refuse them. Mrs. Peterson might report our living conditions as unsuitable. She set the kettle down with more force than intended. He didn't say it outright, but the threat was clear. The town could take my children if I don't conform to their standards of propriety. Samuel stood so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor. They wouldn't dare, wouldn't they? Clara's voice cracked. I'm a widow with no family, no money, and a reputation already tarnished by one night at the saloon. If the town decides I'm morally unfit, it's wrong. The words emerged as a growl. Using children as leverage. It's the way of things. Clara sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. Perhaps I should consider the Reverend's suggestion. Mrs. Harlow might need help with housework. And give up your dignity. Samuel paced the small room. Let them dictate your life because of fear and small minds. What choice do I have? Clara demanded, her own anger finally surfacing. They're my children, Samuel. I would do anything to keep them safe and with me. The use of his given name hung between them, the first time she had spoken it aloud. Samuel stopped pacing, his expression softening as he knelt before her chair. There's another way, he said quietly, and one that would silence the gossip and protect the children. Clara stared at him, realization dawning. Samuel, you can't mean marriage. He spoke the word simply, without embellishment. Proper, legal, blessed by the church if need be. The world seemed to still around them. Clara searched his face, looking for signs of reluctance or obligation, finding only steady certainty. You barely know me, she whispered. Known you longer than some who wed, he countered. Seen your strength, your kindness, your love for those children. Is that enough reason to marry? His eyes held hers. People marry for worse reasons. Money, land, fear of being alone. He hesitated. Wouldn't be expecting anything. Separate rooms still, if you want. Just a name, a protection. Clara's mind whirled with implications. Marriage would indeed silence the gossip, provide security for the children, solve their housing concerns. Yet it felt like a business arrangement, lacking the love she had shared with Jonathan. What about you? She asked finally. What would you gain from this? Something vulnerable flickered across his features. A family. The word emerged rough with emotion. Life in the house that was meant for one. And if Clara swallowed hard. If feelings changed. If one of us wanted more someday. Samuel's gaze dropped briefly, then returned to hers with quiet intensity. Then we'd talk again, like this. Honest. The simplicity of his approach, the absence of pressure or expectation, touched something deep within Clara. This man who crafted metal with such precision was offering her a chance to rebuild her life with the same careful consideration. I need time, she said softly. To think, to pray, to talk with the children. He nodded, rising to his feet. Of course. At the door, he paused. Whatever you decide, the forge is still yours. Job still waiting. Won't withdraw either because of this conversation. After he left, Clara stood motionless in the center of the room, her mind and heart pulling in different directions. Marriage to Samuel would solve so many practical problems, yet the thought of committing herself to another man so soon after Jonathan brought a surge of guilt. From the small bedroom came the sound of stirring children, Emma's voice calling drowsily for her. Life continued its inexorable forward movement, demanding decisions, requiring action. With a deep breath, Clara turned toward her children, knowing that whatever choice she made would shape not just her future, but theirs as well. 3 days passed without Clara's return to the forge. She sent a brief note with Mrs. Peterson explaining that Jacob had taken a slight turn and needed rest, though in truth, the boy was improving steadily. The real reason for her absence was the turmoil in her own heart. She needed distance to think clearly about Samuel's proposal. On the third evening, as snow fell in gentle curtains outside their window, Clara gathered the children by the fire for a conversation she had rehearsed countless times in her mind. "I want to talk to you both about something important," she began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "About Mr. Vaughan." Emma looked up from her wooden horse with immediate interest. "Are we going back to the forge tomorrow? I miss him. That's part of what I wanted to discuss." Clara took a deep breath. "Mr. Vaughan has asked if we would like to live with him permanently." Jacob's eyes widened. "In the rooms above the forge?" "Yes. But more than that," Clara chose her words carefully. "He's asked if I would marry him, which would make us a family. He would be like a father to you both." Silence followed her announcement. Emma's brow furrowed in concentration while Jacob stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. "But we already have a papa," Emma said finally. "Even if he's in heaven." "Yes, darling, and nothing would ever change that," Clara assured her quickly. "Your father will always be your father. But sometimes, when someone we love is gone, God sends others to help care for us." "Would we have to call him Papa?" Jacob asked, his voice small. Clara shook her head. "No. Not unless you wanted to someday. You could still call him Mr. Samuel." Emma crawled into Clara's lap, her small face serious. "Do you love Mr. Samuel like you loved Papa?" The question struck Clara's heart directly. "I care for Mr. Samuel very much," she answered honestly. "He's a good, kind man who has helped us when we needed it most. But it's different from what I felt for your father." "Then why marry him?" Jacob's question held a maturity beyond his years. Clara considered how much to explain. Sometimes marriage is about more than just feeling love. Like in storybook, it's about respect and caring and building a safe home together. She hesitated. And sometimes it's about what's best for children who need protection." Jacob's perceptive gaze met hers. "Is this because of what the Reverend said? Are we in trouble?" Clara's chest tightened. Her son had clearly overheard more than she realized. "Not trouble exactly. But there are people in town who think it's not proper for us to spend so much time with Mr. Samuel unless we're family." "That's stupid," Emma declared with childish frankness. "Despite everything," Clara laughed. "It does seem that way, doesn't it? But these are the rules grown-ups have made." "Would we be safer if you married him?" Jacob asked, always focused on the practical. Clara nodded slowly. "I believe we would. We'd have a warm home, enough food, and Mr. Samuel would make sure you both could continue your schooling without anyone interfering." The children exchanged a look that contained some silent communication Clara couldn't decipher. Then Jacob spoke again, his voice steadier. "I think Daddy would understand. He always said taking care of us was the most important thing." Emma nodded vigorously. "And Mr. Samuel makes the best toy horses. And he let me use his little hammer last week." "He did what?" Clara asked, momentarily distracted. "Just to tap the soft metal," Emma assured her. "He held my hand the whole time. He said I have a natural talent." Clara smiled despite herself, imagining Samuel's enormous hand guiding her daughter's tiny one. "So you both would be agreeable if I decided to accept Mr. Samuel's proposal?" Jacob considered this with serious deliberation. "And I think it would be all right," he said finally. "But can we still keep Papa's picture by my bed?" "Of course," Clara whispered, her throat tight with emotion. "Always," Emma squirmed in her lap. "Will there be cake?" "Mrs. Peterson says weddings always have cake." "I suppose there might be a small one," Clara managed, overwhelmed by the children's simple acceptance of this life-altering possibility. Later, after the children were asleep, Clara sat by the window watching snowflakes dance in the yellow glow of the street lamp. Her mind still churned with doubts and questions, but the children's reactions had clarified something important. They trusted Samuel, felt safe with him. Perhaps that was foundation enough to build upon. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having passed in the night. Clara dressed with special care, selecting her best dress, a navy blue wool that Jonathan had always admired. After settling the children with Mrs. Peterson, she made her way to the forge alone, her decision still not fully formed, but her heart somewhat lighter. The workshop door was closed against the cold, but smoke rose steadily from the chimney. Clara knocked twice, then entered to find Samuel at his workbench rather than the anvil. Before him lay a delicate silver band, inlaid with a small, deep blue stone that caught the light like a captured star. He looked up at her entrance, surprise and something like hope flickering across his features, before he quickly covered the ring with a cloth. "Mrs. Thorne," he greeted, rising. "The boy's better." "Much better," she confirmed, unwrapping her scarf. "I apologize for my absence. I needed time to, consider everything." Samuel nodded, keeping a careful distance between them. "No need to explain." Clara moved closer to the workbench, gesturing to the hidden item. "You're working with silver today." A faint flush colored his cheeks. "Just a small project." She didn't press him, instead turning to warm her hands by the forge. "I spoke with the children last night about your proposal." Samuel remained utterly still, waiting. They were surprisingly accepting of the idea," Clara continued. "Emma's main concern was whether there would be cake." A small smile touched his lips. "Could arrange that." Clara turned to face him fully. "Before I give you my answer, I need to be certain of something." She took a steadying breath. "This arrangement, this marriage, what exactly would it entail between us?" Samuel considered her question with the same deliberate care he gave to his craft. "A home, protection, respect," he paused. "Friendship, if you're willing." And Clara forced herself to be direct. The marriage bed, the flush on his cheeks deepened, but he met her gaze steadily. "Only if you wished it, someday. No expectations otherwise." The simple honesty of his response moved her. This man who could bend iron with his bare hands offered her complete autonomy over her own body, her own heart, a rarity in a world where wives were still considered property in many ways. "And if I never wished it," she pressed, "would you regret your offer then?" Samuel shook his head. "Made peace with solitude long ago. Company, family, that's already more than I hoped for." Clara studied him, seeing the truth in his steady gaze. "You're a rare man, Samuel Vaughan." He looked down at his calloused hands. "Just practical. Like you." The comparison struck Clara as both true and somehow incomplete. Yes, there was practicality in their potential union, security, respectability, mutual benefit. Yet standing in the warmth of his forge, watching the play of light across his serious features, Clara felt something beyond mere practicality stirring within her. "If I accept," she said carefully, "I would want a true partnership. Your opinion on the children's upbringing, your voice in household decisions, not just a convenient arrangement. Wouldn't know how to do it otherwise." He replied simply. Clara nodded, her decision crystallizing. Then, if the offer still stands, I accept your proposal, Samuel." Something profound shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a lightening, as if a weight had been lifted. He moved toward the workbench and uncovered the silver ring. "Made this," he said quietly. "Last few days. Wasn't presuming, just," he faltered, hoping. Clara's breath caught as he held it out to her. The band was exquisitely crafted, delicate filigree surrounding the sapphire like silver lace. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Blue," he explained, as if the color held special significance. "Like the forget-me-nots that grew by the creek where we first met. You were washing clothes, had Emma in a basket nearby." The memory caught Clara by surprise, not the day itself, which she recalled clearly, but the fact that Samuel remembered it too. It had been shortly after they'd arrived in Embertown. Jonathan still alive then, working the mines, while Clara established their modest household. "You noticed us even then?" she asked softly. Samuel nodded, hard not to. "You sang to the baby while you worked. Old Scottish song about heather." Clara felt tears prick her eyes at this unexpected revelation that she had been seen, truly seen, by this quiet man long before circumstances had drawn them together. "May I?" he asked, holding the ring poised. She extended her left hand, noticing with a pang the faint indentation where Jonathan's simple gold band had once rested. As Samuel slipped the silver ring onto her finger, the metal warm from his touch, Clara felt not the betrayal of her first love that she had feared, but a gentle acknowledgement of its endurance alongside this new beginning. "When?" Samuel asked simply. "Soon," Clara replied. "Before Christmas, I think. Simple ceremony with the children, and perhaps Dr. and Mrs. Harlow as witnesses." She met his eyes. "Oh, do, and then we'll face Embertown together as a family." His hand closed carefully around hers, his touch conveying what words could not: promise, protection, possibility. News of Clara and Samuel's engagement spread through Embertown like wildfire, igniting reactions that ranged from genuine well-wishes to thinly veiled disapproval. Mrs. Peterson clasped Clara's hands with tears in her rheumy eyes, declaring it just what Jonathan would have wanted, while Reverend Matthews offered congratulations that sounded suspiciously like relief that a potential moral dilemma had been averted. The week before the wedding, Clara and the children moved their meager belongings to the rooms above the forge. Samuel had spent evenings preparing the space, cleaning, repairing, transforming what had been storage into a comfortable home. Clara was touched to discover he had built new beds for the children, each with a small drawer in the frame for treasures, and had somehow procured a patchwork quilt that brightened the otherwise plain room they would share. Her own room, separate from Samuel's as promised, held a surprise that brought tears to her eyes. A dressing table with a mirror, framed in delicately worked iron vines and leaves. Atop it sat a silver brush and comb, set that gleamed in the winter sunlight. "Was Sarah's?" Samuel explained when she asked, his voice holding old grief, but no reluctance. "Should be used again by someone worthy." Clara ran her fingers over the intricate pattern. "Are you certain? These must be precious to you." "She would have liked you," he said simply. "Strong, kind, practical." It was perhaps the highest compliment he could offer, and Clara accepted both the gift and the sentiment with equal gratitude. The wedding itself was a modest affair held in Dr. Harlow's parlor rather than the church, a compromise that spared them Reverend Matthews' scrutiny while still maintaining propriety. Clara wore her navy dress with a cream shawl Emma had helped decorate with small embroidered flowers. Samuel, clean-shaven for the occasion, looked transformed in a black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the unexpected grace of his bearing. Dr. Harlow officiated with a brevity that suited the couple's reserved natures. The children stood witness alongside Mrs. Harlow, who dabbed at her eyes throughout the short ceremony. When Samuel placed a second ring on Clara's finger, a simple gold band to accompany the sapphire engagement ring, his hands were steady, but his eyes held an emotion so raw that Clara found herself momentarily breathless. "With this ring, I thee wed," he recited, the traditional words emerging with quiet certainty. The kiss that sealed their vows was brief and gentle, a mere brushing of lips, yet Clara felt it like a promise of respect, of safety, of possibility. As they signed the marriage certificate, Clara Thorne becoming Clara Vaughan with a stroke of the pen, she experienced not the expected pang of disloyalty to Jonathan's memory, but a curious sense of continuity, as if one chapter of her life was not ending, but merging into another. True to Emma's hope, there was indeed cake, a small spice cake Mrs. Harlow had baked, decorated with crystallized sugar that the children eyed with naked longing throughout the ceremony. As they gathered around the Harlows' dining table for the modest celebration afterward, Clara found herself watching Samuel with her children, the careful way he cut equal slices for them, his attentive ear bent to Emma's excited chatter, the slight protective shift of his body toward Jacob when the boy coughed briefly. These were not the actions of a man fulfilling an obligation, Clara realized, but of one already embracing the role of father with his whole heart. That evening, after settling the children in their new beds, Clara stood awkwardly in the hallway between her room and Samuel's. Despite their agreement, despite the separate chambers, this first night as husband and wife carried an inevitable tension. Samuel emerged from his room, now dressed in simple trousers and a clean shirt, his hair still damp from washing. "Children asleep," Clara nodded. Emma could hardly contain her excitement about her new bed. "And Jacob," she smiled. "I believe his exact words were, 'Mr. Samuel builds things proper.'" A pleased expression crossed Samuel's features. He hesitated, then gestured toward the small sitting room adjacent to the kitchen. "A tea before sleep." The normalcy of the suggestion eased some of Clara's nervousness. That would be nice. They settled in chairs on either side of the wood stove, the crackling fire and ticking clock, the only sounds, as Samuel prepared the tea with methodical movements. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, adding to the sense of isolation and intimacy within their new home. "Strange," Samuel said suddenly, handing her a steaming cup. "What is?" "Having voices in the house again. Life." He glanced around the room, his expression softening. "Good strain," Clara understood. After years of solitude, the constant presence of others, the children's laughter, her own movements in the kitchen, the domestic sounds of family life must be both welcome and disorienting for him. "I hope we haven't disrupted your routines too badly," she said. He shook his head. "Worth it." They sipped their tea in companionable silence, each lost in private thoughts. Clara found herself studying her husband's profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw now visible without the beard, the slight furrow between his brows that never fully disappeared, the unexpected length of his eyelashes. She had married this man for security, for protection, for her children's future. Yet sitting here in the quiet warmth of their shared home, she felt the first stirrings of something she had not anticipated, genuine affection. "Samuel," she said softly, setting down her cup. "Thank you for all of this." She gestured to encompass not just the room, but everything he had offered them. He looked at her directly, his gaze steady and clear. "No need for thanks between us." "Nevertheless," Clara smiled, "I am grateful." Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability he rarely allowed to surface. "Never thought I'd have this again. Family, purpose beyond work." "Nor I," Clara admitted. "After Jonathan died, I could barely imagine the next day, let alone a new life." Samuel nodded in understanding. "Grief blinds, makes the world small." The simple truth of his observation struck Clara deeply. Yes, grief had narrowed her vision to mere survival. Each day a struggle to breathe, to function, to care for her children. When had the world begun to widen again? Perhaps in this very forge, watching Samuel work with quiet dignity while her children played nearby. "Does it ever fully leave?" she asked, voicing the question that had haunted her these past years. "The grief?" Samuel considered this with characteristic thoughtfulness. "No," he said finally, "but changes shape, becomes part of you, not all of you." Clara felt tears prick her eyes at the profound truth of his words. This man of few words had articulated what she had been trying to understand since Jonathan's death, that healing didn't mean forgetting or replacing, but integrating loss into a new wholeness. "It's late," Samuel said gently, noticing her emotional response. "It's been a long day," Clara nodded, gathering herself. At the hallway that led to their separate rooms, she paused, suddenly uncertain of the proper protocol. Should she embrace him, offer a goodnight kiss? The awkwardness of their unique situation reasserted itself. Samuel solved the dilemma by taking her hand briefly, his thumb brushing over her new rings. "Would sleep well, Clara." "You too, Samuel." In her room, Clara changed into her nightgown and sat at the dressing table, brushing her hair with Sarah's silver brush. The woman in the mirror looked different somehow. Still herself, but with a quieter confidence in her eyes. Mrs. Vaughan. The name felt strange yet increasingly right, like a new garment that needed wearing to achieve perfect fit. She touched the locket at her throat, Jonathan's gift, Samuel's craftsmanship, and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for both men who had shaped her life so profoundly. Then she slipped beneath the covers of her new bed, listening to the unfamiliar creaks and sighs of the house. The distant sound of Samuel moving in his own room, the occasional soft cough from the children's chamber. These were the sounds of family, of home, of safety, a symphony she had feared lost forever after Jonathan's death. As sleep claimed her, Clara's last conscious thought was that perhaps marriage for practical reasons didn't preclude the growth of deeper feelings. Perhaps, in time, respect and gratitude might naturally evolve into something more. Outside, snow continued to fall on Embertown, covering the forge and the family within its protective white blanket. Winter settled deeply over Embertown, wrapping the small settlement in its frigid embrace. January brought snowdrifts taller than Emma, and temperatures so low that the creek froze solid enough for the children to slide across its surface on improvised wooden sleds Samuel crafted for them. Through it all, the forge remained a beacon of warmth and industry, its chimney puffing steady smoke into the crystalline air. Life in the Vaughan household fell into comfortable rhythms. Each morning, Clara rose first to prepare breakfast and pack lunches for the children, who had returned to school after the holiday break. Samuel would join them shortly after, his presence at the table still somewhat reserved, but increasingly relaxed as weeks passed. After the children departed, Clara and Samuel would descend to the forge together, she to her desk of accounts and correspondence, he to his anvil and fire. They worked in companionable silence most days, the steady percussion of hammer on metal providing background to Clara's scratching pen. Occasionally, customers would arrive, ranchers needing repairs, townsfolk commissioning household items, the stagecoach driver with a broken wheel rim. Clara greeted them with quiet dignity, her presence as Mrs. Vaughan gradually accepted, if not entirely embraced by all of Embertown's residents. It was during one such ordinary afternoon in late January that Silas Blackwood returned to the forge. Clara heard his voice before she saw him, that distinctive blend of charm and command that had once offered her desperate salvation at a terrible price. "Vaughan, I've come about those railings," Blackwood called as he stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. He stopped short upon seeing Clara at her desk. Well, if it isn't the new Mrs. Vaughan. The arrangement seems to be suiting you." Clara set down her pen carefully. "Mr. Blackwood, the railings are completed and ready for installation whenever you wish." "Efficient as always," he remarked, removing his gloves. His gaze traveled over her with an assessment that made her skin crawl. "Marriage agrees with you. You're positively glowing." Before Clara could respond, Samuel emerged from the back of the forge, wiping his hands on a cloth. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, despite the roaring fire, as the two men regarded each other. "Blackwood," Samuel acknowledged with a curt nod. "Railings are crated by the door. Need help loading them? I've got men waiting outside," Blackwood replied, still watching Clara. "Though I admit I'm curious about this domestic transformation, from saloon girl to blacksmith's wife in the span of months. Quite the elevation in circumstances." Clara rose from her chair, determined not to show the discomfort his presence provoked. "If you'll excuse me, I should check our inventory of copper before placing an order." "Always so proper now," Blackwood called after her as she moved toward the storeroom. "But I remember how you looked in that green silk, Mrs. Vaughan, as do many of my patrons." Clara froze, her back to the men, shame washing over her at the reminder of that single night. Before she could compose herself, she heard a sudden movement and turned to find Samuel standing inches from Blackwood, his considerable height and breadth looming over the saloon owner. "You've got your railings," Samuel said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Take them and go." Blackwood's smile never faltered, but his eyes hardened. "Careful, Vaughan. That sounds remarkably like a threat." "Observation," Samuel corrected. "This is my forge. My home. My wife deserves respect here." "Respect," Blackwood echoed, glancing again at Clara. Interesting choice of words for a woman who... He never finished the sentence. Samuel's hand shot out, gripping Blackwood's expensive coat front, bunching the fabric as he pulled the smaller man closer. "Samuel!" Clara cried, alarmed by the sudden violence in her normally controlled husband. Samuel didn't look at her, his gaze locked on Blackwood's suddenly wary face. "You were leaving," he stated, the words emerging with deadly calm. "Don't come back unless it's business, respectful business." For a tense moment, Clara feared Blackwood would escalate the confrontation. Instead, the saloon owner raised his hands in mock surrender. "No need for dramatics. I meant no offense to your arrangement." Samuel released him with a slight push. Blackwood straightened his coat with exaggerated care. His composure regained, though a flush of anger colored his cheeks. "I'll send my men in for the railings," he said coolly. "Good day to you both." After he departed, silence fell over the forge. Samuel remained motionless, his back to Clara, tension evident in every line of his powerful frame. "Samuel," Clara said softly, approaching him. "And it's all right. His words can't hurt me." "They did," he contradicted, still not turning. "Saw it in your face." Clara gently placed her hand on his arm. "What matters is that you defended me. That means more than his cruelty." Samuel finally faced her, his expression conflicted. "Shouldn't have touched him, lost control. Not how a man should act." "Perhaps not," Clara agreed. "But I confess, I found it rather satisfying to see him put in his place." A ghost of a smile touched Samuel's lips. "Did you now?" "Indeed." Clara squeezed his arm before releasing it. "Though I hope it won't affect his payment for those railings. They were expensive materials." Samuel's almost smile broadened slightly at her practicality. "He'll pay. Values his reputation too much to cheat openly." The incident marked a subtle shift in their relationship. That evening, as they sat in their small parlor after the children were asleep, the usual comfortable silence felt charged with something new. Clara sensed Samuel watching her as she mended Jacob's school shirt, his gaze thoughtful. "Something on your mind?" she asked without looking up from her needle. Samuel hesitated, then spoke with characteristic directness. "Been married almost a month now," Clara nodded, uncertain where he was leading. "Yes. Wondering if you regret it." The vulnerability in his voice drew her eyes to his face. "The arrangement? Regret?" Clara set aside her mending. "No, Samuel, not for a moment. Children seem settled. Jacob's breathing better. Emma talks constantly." He smiled faintly at this last observation. "They're thriving," Clara agreed. "Thanks largely to you." Samuel shook his head dismissively. "You're their strength, always have been." "Perhaps," Clara acknowledged, "but you've given them security, a home, a man's influence." She paused. "They adore you, you know. Emma told her teacher that you're teaching her to be a proper blacksmith someday." Samuel looked startled, then pleased. Girl has a good eye for metal. Steady hands. "And Jacob treasures those moments when you read with him in the evenings," Clara continued. "He's never had that, a man's patience with his slower progress." Samuel seemed to absorb this information like a man cataloguing precious materials. "And you?" he asked finally, his voice lower. "Are you content?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken meanings. Clara considered her answer carefully, aware that her husband deserved complete honesty. "I'm more than content, Samuel," she said softly. "I feel safe for the first time in years, respected, valued." She met his gaze steadily. "I entered this marriage for practical reasons, as did you, but I find myself increasingly grateful that circumstances brought us together." Something kindled in Samuel's eyes, a warmth, a hope he quickly tempered. "Good," he said simply. "And that's good." Later that night, as Clara prepared for bed, she found herself lingering at her window, watching the moonlight on fresh snow. The confrontation with Blackwood had stirred memories she preferred to forget, yet Samuel's defense of her honor had awoken something else, a fluttering awareness of him not just as provider and protector, but as a man. She thought of his hands, powerful enough to shape iron, gentle enough to guide Emma's small fingers on a tool. She remembered the surprising grace of his movements when he thought himself unobserved, the rare smile that transformed his serious features, the steadfast patience he showed with Jacob's reading difficulties. Were these the first stirrings of something deeper than gratitude and respect? Clara placed her palm against the cold window glass, watching her breath fog the pain. If she were honest with herself, the answer was increasingly, undeniably yes. The realization brought both trepidation and a curious lightness to her heart. She had not expected to feel such emotions again after Jonathan had married Samuel with clear-eyed practicality rather than romantic notions. Yet here she stood, a widow reawakening to possibilities she had thought forever closed to her. "One step at a time," she whispered to herself, the words forming a small cloud on the glass. "For now, It was enough to acknowledge these emerging feelings privately. Time would reveal whether they might grow into something more, something they both might welcome into the solid foundation they had built together. February brought an unexpected thaw, the snow retreating to reveal muddy streets and the first tentative signs of approaching spring. With the milder weather came increased business at the forge, as ranchers and farmers prepared equipment for the coming season. Samuel worked longer hours, often continuing after supper by lamplight, his powerful silhouette visible from the street as he bent over particularly challenging commissions. Clara worried about his exhaustion, but admired his dedication. One evening, after putting the children to bed, she brought a cup of coffee down to the forge and found him struggling with an elaborate garden gate commissioned by one of the wealthier ranchers outside town. "It's beautiful," she said, setting the coffee beside him and studying the intricate design of intertwined vines and flowers emerging from the metal. Samuel straightened, rubbing his lower back. "Ornamental, not my usual work, yet you agreed to make it," Clara observed, noting the detailed sketch pinned to his workbench. Samuel shrugged. "Good money. Emma needs new shoes soon." The casual mention of his concern for her daughter's needs touched Clara deeply. She found herself reaching out to gently touch his arm. "You're a good man. Samuel Vaughan." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then at her face, something vulnerable flickering in his expression. "Try to be." Clara became acutely aware of their proximity, of the heat radiating from the forge and from Samuel himself. Her hand remained on his arm, the solid muscle beneath the fabric both foreign and increasingly familiar. "You should rest," she said softly. "And the gate will wait until morning." Samuel nodded, though he seemed reluctant to move away from her touch. "Just need to finish this section," Clara smiled, recognizing his stubborn dedication. "I'll leave the coffee. Then, don't be too long." As she turned to go, Samuel's voice stopped her. "Clara." She looked back, finding him watching her with an intensity that quickened her pulse. "Yes?" He seemed to struggle with words, finally settling on, "Thank you for the coffee." Clara knew he meant more than just the beverage. "You're welcome, Samuel." Upstairs, she moved about their home, straightening pillows and banking the stove for the night, her thoughts circling back to the moment in the forge. Something was shifting between them, the careful boundaries of their arrangement becoming less defined with each passing day. The question was whether she was ready to acknowledge it openly, to take a step that could not be undone. The decision was made for her 3 days later, when disaster struck. Clara was preparing supper, the children doing homework at the kitchen table, when a frantic pounding at their door sent her hurrying downstairs. She opened it to find one of the Johnson boys, barely 13, his face smudged with soot and panic. "Mrs. Vaughan? Come quick. There's been an accident at the saloon. A fire started, and Mr. Vaughan's trapped inside." Clara's blood turned to ice. "What? Why was Samuel at the saloon? Installing those railings on the new balcony," the boy explained breathlessly. "The fire started in the kitchen, spread fast. Mr. Blackwood got everyone out, but part of the ceiling fell. Mr. Vaughan pushed one of the girls out of the way. Clara was already grabbing her shawl. "Emma, Jacob," she called upstairs, trying to keep her voice steady. "Put on your coats and come down immediately. There's been an accident." The scene at the saloon was chaos. Smoke billowing from broken windows, townsfolk forming a bucket line from the water trough to the entrance, shouting and confusion everywhere. Clara clutched the children's hands tightly as she searched the crowd for any sign of Samuel. "Stay right here," she instructed them, positioning them beside the dry goods store across the street. "Do not move, no matter what. Promise me." "But Papa Samuel," Emma began, using the name she had recently adopted without prompting. "I'm going to find him," Clara assured her, fighting to keep her voice calm. "But I need to know you're safe." Dr. Harlow emerged from the crowd, his normally immaculate coat covered in soot. Clara rushed to him. "Where is my husband? They've got him out," the doctor said grimly. "He's alive, Clara, but hurt. Burns on his arms and a bad blow to the head. They've taken him to my surgery." Clara felt lightheaded with relief and fear. "The children—" "My wife will watch them," Dr. Harlow interrupted, already gesturing to Mrs. Harlow, who hurried over. "Go to Samuel. He was asking for you. before he lost consciousness. The next hours passed in a blur of terror and desperate prayer. Clara sat beside Samuel's bed in the doctor's back room, his massive frame unnaturally still beneath the sheets. His arms were bandaged from wrists to elbows, burns from pushing through falling debris to rescue one of the saloon girls. A deeper gash on his forehead had required stitches, and Dr. Harlow warned of possible concussion from the beam that had struck him. "He needs rest now," the doctor told her gently, "and time to heal. The burns are painful, but not life-threatening. It's the head injury that concerns me most." Clara nodded numbly, her eyes never leaving Samuel's face, so pale beneath the soot and bandages. "I'll stay with him. I've sent word to Mrs. Peterson to look after the children tonight," Dr. Harlow added. "They can stay with her until—" "No," Clara interrupted firmly. "Bring them here. They should be with their father." The doctor raised his eyebrows slightly at her vehemence, but nodded. "As you wish." When Emma and Jacob arrived, Clara knelt to embrace them, drawing strength from their small, warm bodies against hers. "Papa Samuel is hurt," she explained gently, "but Dr. Harlow is taking good care of him. He's sleeping now to help his body heal." "Can we see him?" Jacob asked, his voice small and frightened. Clara nodded, leading them to Samuel's bedside. Emma's eyes filled with tears at the sight of the powerful blacksmith lying so still, while Jacob simply reached out to touch Samuel's uninjured hand with solemn concern. "He saved someone from the fire," Clara told them. "He was very brave, like a hero in a story," Emma whispered. Yes," Clara agreed, her throat tight. "Exactly like that." The children eventually fell asleep on a small cot Dr. Harlow provided, but Clara maintained her vigil through the night, dampening Samuel's lips with water, adjusting his bandages, and most of all, whispering urgent prayers that the man who had saved her family would himself be saved. Near dawn, Samuel stirred, his eyes opening slowly, confusion evident in his gaze until it focused on Clara's face. "The girl," he rasped. "Molly, is she—" "She's safe," Clara assured him, taking his unbandaged hand. "Everyone got out, thanks to you." Relief washed over his features. "The children here, sleeping," Clara gestured to the cot where Emma and Jacob were curled together like puppies. "And they wouldn't leave you." Samuel's eyes softened at the sight of them. "Shouldn't see me like this, frightening." "They needed to be with you," Clara countered. "We all did." His fingers tightened around hers. "Ceiling came down. Thought of you, the children. Thought I'd never—" He stopped, pain crossing his features that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. "Was Samuel Vaughan," Clara said, her voice trembling with emotions too long contained. "Don't you dare leave us now that we've found you." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, then a dawning hope. "Clara," she leaned closer, her free hand gently touching his cheek. "I thought I'd lost you before I could tell you that our arrangement has become so much more to me." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Oh, that you have become so much more." Samuel's eyes searched hers, looking for confirmation of what he was hearing. "More," Clara nodded, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "I married you for security, for protection, but somewhere along the way, I began to see the man behind the practical arrangement, the man who handles iron with strength and children with tenderness, the man who defends without question and provides without complaint." She drew a shaky breath. "The man I've grown to love." The word hung between them. Love, so long unspoken in their careful relationship of mutual respect and practical consideration. Samuel's eyes closed briefly, as if the word itself caused physical pain. When they opened again, they held a vulnerability Clara had glimpsed only in rare, unguarded moments. "Thought it was just me," he admitted hoarsely. "Didn't want to pressure, didn't want you to feel obligated." "Oh, Samuel," Clara laughed softly through her tears. "We've been so careful with each other, haven't we?" A hint of his rare smile touched his lips. "Too careful." Clara leaned forward and, with infinite gentleness, pressed her lips to his. Unlike the brief, ceremonial kiss of their wedding, this one held promise, tenderness, and the first flames of passion, long banked but never extinguished. When she finally pulled away, Samuel's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if savoring the sensation. "Worth getting hit by a burning beam for," he murmured. When he opened them, Clara laughed despite herself. "Don't you dare make jokes about this. You terrified me." "Sorry." He didn't look sorry at all, his eyes now alight with something Clara had never seen there before. Happiness. pure and unguarded. "Mama!" Emma's sleepy voice came from the cot. "Is Papa Samuel awake? Come see for yourselves," Clara called softly. The children scrambled over, their faces lighting with joy at seeing Samuel conscious. With careful mindfulness of his injuries, they clambered onto the bed beside him, their small hands touching his face as if to reassure themselves of his presence. "You saved someone from the fire," Jacob said with quiet awe, "like a knight in the stories." "Not a knight," Samuel demurred, "just did what needed doing. That's what heroes say in stories too," Emma declared with absolute certainty. As Clara watched her children with her husband, yes, truly her husband now in every sense, she felt a completeness she had thought forever lost after Jonathan's death. Life had taken unexpected turns, some devastating, some miraculous, to bring her to this moment of grace. Outside, the first light of dawn broke over Embertown, gilding the blackened skeleton of the saloon and the mud-streaked streets with promise of renewal. Spring came to Embertown in earnest by late March, bringing with it mud and renewal in equal measure. Samuel's recovery progressed slowly but steadily, the burns on his arms healing to leave puckered scars he dismissed as badges of the trade, the head injury gradually relinquishing its hold on his strength. By the time the first crocuses pushed through the thawing earth, he had returned to limited work in the forge, though Clara insisted he rest frequently and forbade any heavy lifting. "You're worse than the doctor," Samuel grumbled one afternoon, as she forced him to sit while she fetched water for cooling metal. "The doctor doesn't have to live with you," Clara retorted, though her eyes held affection rather than censure. "And besides, Emma needs you well enough to continue her blacksmithing lessons." Samuel smiled at the mention of his stepdaughter's ongoing fascination with his craft. "Girl has talent, better eye than half the Smiths I've known." Their relationship had transformed in the weeks since Samuel's brush with death. The careful distance they had maintained dissolved into an easy intimacy, hands clasped while reading in the evening, stolen kisses when the children weren't looking, and eventually the quiet merging of their separate bedrooms into a shared space where healing and discovery intertwined. Clara found in Samuel a tenderness that belied his imposing exterior, while he marveled at the passion that had lain dormant beneath her practical reserve. They learned each other slowly, with the same patience and care they had shown in building their family, finding in physical intimacy the natural extension of the deep respect they had cultivated from the beginning. The town's attitude toward their union had also shifted following the Saloon fire. Samuel's heroism in saving Molly, one of the dance hall girls, had elevated him in the eyes of even the most judgmental citizens. And Clara, now firmly established as Mrs. Vaughan, found the whispers about her brief stint at the saloon fading into irrelevance. Even Reverend Matthews had modified his stance, stopping by the forge one Sunday after services to commend Samuel's bravery and to inquire after his health with what appeared to be genuine concern. If he noticed the changed dynamic between the couple, the clear affection that now flowed freely between them, he made no comment beyond a thoughtful observation that the Lord works in mysterious ways. Only one shadow lingered over their newfound happiness: Silas Blackwood. The saloon owner had lost his establishment, but not his influence in Embertown. Rumors circulated that he planned to rebuild, bigger and grander than before, with insurance money that seemed suspiciously generous given the circumstances of the fire. More troubling were the occasional glances he cast toward the forge when passing, his expression calculating in a way that made Clara uneasy. Samuel dismissed her concern, but she noticed he was careful to lock the forge at night now, a precaution he had never taken before. April arrived with a particular sweetness that year, as if nature herself celebrated the Vaughan family's hard-won contentment. The forge garden, which Clara had begun preparing at the first opportunity, showed promise of vegetables and herbs that would sustain them through the coming winter. Jacob's health continued to improve, his once frequent coughs now rare enough to be noteworthy. Emma flourished in school and at home, her natural exuberance finding perfect outlet in the safety of their family circle. It was on a particularly fine Saturday, with Samuel and the children working together in the garden while Clara prepared a picnic lunch, that Blackwood finally made his move. The pounding on the forge door was so violent it could be heard clearly in the garden. Samuel rose from where he'd been showing Jacob how to properly set seedlings, his expression immediately alert. "Stay here with your mother," he instructed the children, his tone brooking no argument as he strode toward the front of the building. Clara gathered the children close, listening intently. Raised voices reached them, Samuel's measured tones contrasting with another man's more strident accusations. Then a third voice joined in, the marshal's distinctive drawl attempting to mediate. "What's happening?" Emma whispered, clutching Clara's skirt. "I'm not sure, darling." Clara tried to sound calm despite the dread building in her chest. "Let's go inside through the back door and wait." In the kitchen, Clara settled the children with bread and jam, straining to hear the conversation that had moved into the forge proper. The words were muffled, but the tension in the voices was unmistakable. After what seemed an eternity, heavy footsteps approached the stairs, and Samuel appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Samuel?" Clara rose from the table. "What's happened?" He glanced at the children, then gestured for Clara to follow him to the hallway. Once out of earshot, he spoke in a low voice. "Blackwood's claiming I set the fire, says I did it to sabotage his business, that I deliberately waited until the balcony installation to make it look like an accident." Clara gasped. "That's absurd. You were injured saving one of his girls. Convenient cover, according to him." Samuel's jaw tightened. "He's filed a formal complaint with the marshal. There'll be an inquiry. But why? What could he possibly gain?" Samuel's eyes met hers. "The forge. He wants the property. Says it's the only suitable location to rebuild the saloon, since it's on higher ground, less prone to spring flooding." Clara felt sick. "He can't just take our home." "Not without cause," Samuel agreed. "But if I'm found guilty of arson..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The following weeks passed in a haze of anxiety, punctuated by official interviews and town gossip. The marshal, though clearly skeptical of Blackwood's claims, was obligated to investigate. Samuel's reputation for honesty worked in his favor, as did the testimony of several witnesses who had seen him working diligently on the balcony installation right up until the fire broke out. What the inquiry lacked was a definitive cause for the fire or any evidence linking Samuel to its origin. Blackwood insisted it had started unnaturally quickly, spreading with a ferocity that suggested coal oil or another accelerant, but the damage was too extensive to prove his theory. Through it all, Clara maintained a brave face for the children, while privately wrestling with fears she had thought banished forever. The specter of losing their home, their security, perhaps even Samuel himself if Blackwood's accusations somehow stuck. The turning point came from an unexpected quarter. Molly, the young woman Samuel had saved from the collapsing ceiling, appeared at the forge one evening, her pretty face serious beneath her fashionable bonnet. "Mrs. Vaughan," she said when Clara opened the door, "I need to speak with you and your husband. It's about the fire." Clara ushered her inside, calling Samuel from the workshop. They sat in the small parlor, Molly perched nervously on the edge of a chair, her gloved hands twisting in her lap. "I've been afraid to come forward," she began without preamble. "Mr. Blackwood has been good to me in his way, gave me work when no one else would. But what he's doing to your family isn't right, not after Mr. Vaughan saved my life." Samuel leaned forward. "You know something about how the fire started?" Molly nodded, her eyes downcast. "It wasn't an accident, but it wasn't you either." She took a deep breath. "It was Mr. Blackwood himself. I saw him in the storeroom before it happened, pouring something from a bottle onto some rags. I didn't think much of it at the time. Thought maybe he was cleaning or something." Clara exchanged a shocked glance with Samuel. "Are you certain?" "Yes, ma'am. And there's more." Molly's voice strengthened. "The saloon wasn't doing well. Too many miners moved on, not enough new folks coming through. I heard Mr. Blackwood talking with the insurance man weeks before, arguing about how much the place was worth. He set the fire for the insurance money," Samuel said slowly, comprehension dawning. "And then tried to blame you to get the forge as well," Clara added, outrage coloring her voice. "The nerve of that man!" Molly nodded miserably. "He didn't count on anyone being hurt. The fire spread faster than he expected, I think. When that ceiling beam started to come down," she looked at Samuel with naked gratitude. "You didn't hesitate. You pushed me out of the way and took the blow yourself. I can't let him destroy your family after that." Samuel's expression softened. "Takes courage to speak against a powerful man. Will you testify to this?" Clara asked gently. "Tell the marshal what you saw." Molly squared her shoulders. "Yes. It's time someone stood up to Silas Blackwood." The marshal arrested Blackwood the following day, based on Molly's testimony and evidence from the insurance company that revealed suspicious increases in coverage just weeks before the fire. The would-be arsonist was transported to the county seat for trial, his final glare at the forge promising retribution that would never come. With the cloud of suspicion lifted, life at the Vaughan household returned to its peaceful rhythm. As summer approached, bringing the promise of long days and warm evenings, Clara found herself taking stock of the journey that had led her to this unexpected happiness. She had entered the saloon that autumn night as a desperate widow, willing to sacrifice her dignity for her children's survival. She had accepted Samuel's proposal as a practical solution to an impossible situation. Yet what had begun as necessity had blossomed into something neither of them had dared to hope for, a true partnership founded on respect, strengthened by shared purpose, and ultimately transformed by love that had grown naturally between them. One evening in late May, as they sat on the small bench Samuel had built outside the forge, watching the children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Clara leaned her head against her husband's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have gone?" she asked softly. "If you hadn't found that note from Dr. Harlow in my pocket that night at the saloon." Samuel's arm tightened around her waist. "We think about it often. I was so determined to manage alone," Clara mused, "so afraid to accept help, especially from a man I barely knew." "Stubborn," Samuel agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Like Emma," Clara laughed. "I suppose I am, but thankfully not too stubborn to recognize a lifeline when it was offered." She turned to look at him directly. "You saved us," as Samuel, "not just with medicine and shelter, but with patience and respect when I needed it most." Samuel shook his head. "You saved yourself, had the courage to walk away from Blackwood's offer, to accept a different path." His calloused fingers brushed her cheek. To take a chance on a lonely blacksmith with more iron than words. "The best chance I ever took," Clara whispered, leaning in to kiss him with all the love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. From the garden, Emma's voice called excitedly, "Mama, Papa, Samuel, look how many fireflies we caught." They turned to watch their children approach, Jacob carefully carrying a jar glowing with tiny lights, Emma dancing alongside him with characteristic enthusiasm. The sight filled Clara's heart to overflowing. Her family, whole and thriving, gathered in the soft evening light outside the home they had built together. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they had faced all others, with courage, with determination, and with the unshakable foundation of a love forged in adversity's fire and tempered by time's gentle hand.